Mr. Sessions is recorded as voting aye.
Do any other members wish to vote? Has Nancy voted? Has Ms. Mace voted? Yes, okay. Well, the clerk can tally the report.
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, the ayes are 22, the nays are 20.
The motion passes. Now recognize Ms. Greene for 4 minutes and 21 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're here tonight to hold Merrick Garland in contempt of Congress, and there has been complaint and complaint after complaint from the other side of the aisle. Now, I'd like to remind everyone that the American taxpayers were forced to pay millions and millions of dollars for the January 6th committee last Congress, who was convened during prime time, evening hours, and they hired an ABC News executive, James Goldman, to produce these committee hearings. Actually had the American taxpayers pay for this. And Democrats are complaining about our committee hearing this evening. I'd also like to remind everyone that during the 117th Congress, we would vote until 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, many, many times, late at night. And that was when Democrats controlled the House. But the worst thing about the January 6th committee is that the speaker broke her own rules. When she produced this committee, created the committee, the minority leader appointed members of Congress to this committee, and they were denied being able to participate on the January 6th committee. This committee operated against the rules of Congress. It was procedurally defective. And today, right now, Peter Navarro is sitting in jail because he was held in contempt of Congress. And also, Steve Bannon has been held in contempt of Congress and could go to jail soon. Those are the consequences of when the Democrats controlled the House. They broke the rules. And the consequences are people have gone to jail, and they may soon go to jail. And tonight, we're here to hold Merrick Garland in contempt of Congress. And this committee needs to be able to proceed forward to do that. I'd also like to remind the committee and anyone watching this that every single time we hold a committee hearing and oversight committee, the Democrats attack President Trump repeatedly. Doesn't matter what the issue is, doesn't matter what the topic is. They can't produce facts. They can't produce anything to make their arguments. They make it about personal character attacks on the former president of the United States and our Republican presidential candidate. Every single time they attack President Trump. They think the way to win an argument is to attack President Trump. You talk about character attacks, it goes on and on. Also, members of this committee attack me repeatedly, over and over and over again, constantly. But they're offended when I say something back. And I think this needs to be called out, Mr. Chairman, because the hypocrisy is screaming and the American people watch it every single day. And I will not apologize for my words, and I will not change them. And I will not tolerate being treated this way constantly on this committee and in other committees. And I think that we need, if we're going to hold hearings like this and hold Merrick Garland in contempt of Congress, I think we should move forward and go ahead and do that. But the actual behavior that happens across the aisle in this committee of constant attacks on President Trump are unbelievable. And attacks on President Trump, the weaponized government against President Trump. I want you to know something. He may be sitting in a New York courtroom with a sham trial with a political judge whose daughter works for Democrats. But I'll tell you right now, President Trump is up 10 points in Georgia because the American people see this for exactly what it is. They know what it is. And it's completely wrong. And the fact that our American people's hard-earned tax dollars were spent on the January 6th committee with no accountability is wrong too. I think Democrats should be held accountable for that and the wrongs that they've committed, and the fact that Peter Navarro is in jail right now and Steve Bannon may have to go to jail soon. And Mr. Chairman, I would ask that we can go ahead and move forward as soon as possible to hold Merrick Garland in contempt of Congress. Thank you.
Gentlelady yields. Does any other member seek recognition? Mr. Garcia.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tonight has been very interesting. I want to just take a moment just to put today in context. We're here right now at this late hour to accommodate the majority's field trip to praise their leader. And let's not forget that he left office in disgrace. Yes, gentle lady from Georgia, we're going to talk about that Donald Trump, who stole classified materials and stored them in his bathroom. He was investigated and indicted for his crimes. Now, Attorney General Garland set up a parallel investigation of President Biden's handling of classified documents as well. And that shows the Department of Justice is actually fair and independent. So to oversee this investigation, he appointed Robert Hur, a former U.S. attorney handpicked by Donald Trump. Robert Hur found no wrongdoing by President Biden. No wrongdoing by President Biden. But he chose to smear President Biden with a totally unprofessional and wrong assessment of the president's age and mental sharpness. Now, as we know, his assessment about President Biden was wrong because you can literally yourself read the transcript, which is over 250 pages long. Now, many of us, especially us Democrats, know the president. He is sharp. He is focused on the big issues. He's dealing with large challenges across the world. Now, the majority is hyping up this issue to distract us from the fact that Donald Trump keeps embarrassing himself in public. And as much as the gentle lady from Georgia and others may not like it, we know that Trump's public statements have been crazy and incoherent for years. And we know that he is too tired and sleepy to stay awake through his own criminal trial. It's not President Biden who's not sharp. It's, in fact, Donald Trump. Now, let's look at public reporting. I'm only going to talk about public reporting. His criminal trial started on April 15th. And here's a summary of the press reports. On his first day of his trial, Reuters reported that Trump appeared to doze off during jury selection. On April 16th, it was reported that Trump dropped his head inside the courtroom, keeping his eyes closed before jolting his head upright. On April 19th, the New York Times reported Trump's eyes remained, quote, closed for extended periods during the final day of jury selection. On April 22nd, MSNBC reported that Trump's lawyers were fighting to keep him awake. On April 30th, NBC and the New York Times reported that Trump nodded off for significant portions of witness testimony, and as we all know, basically kept his eyes closed for hours and hours on end. On May 9th, Trump's eyes remained closed for many minutes, and Trump later, of course, dozed on and off. And the reports go on and on. May 13th, Trump was, quote, asleep during the afternoon session. On May 14th, a political reporter said Trump slouched in his seat and closed his eyes and his mouth. Now, here we have a photo of Donald Trump, of course, through some of his trial. And I bring this up because it's Donald Trump that's asleep and it's hurting and dividing our country. And this attack on President Biden and his mental acuteness or his ability or his age is completely just a reason and an excuse for the Republicans to continue to attack President Biden when we all know that Donald Trump is the one that's unfit to be president. And that's why the majority is so desperate to be here today, because they want to help him get elected and hurt President Biden. Well, it's not going to work. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize myself first to offer an amendment. The clerk will distribute the amendment to all members. No, we're not done. We're not done. I'm just going to do an amendment, and then we'll have all the debate we want. And I know Mr. Goldman has an amendment he wants to offer. Ms. Luna has an amendment. And
The first part for the amendment.
We can go back to time on the ANS.
yeah, we can go back. Everybody will have an opportunity to talk. We're just going to go ahead and do the amendment in nature substitute. The clerk, does everyone have a copy? Okay, Ms. Boebert, I have to allow people to speak on the ANS if they want right now. So I will recognize you for 5 minutes. Ms.
Thank you,
Boebert.
Mr. Chairman. First, I just want to apologize to the American people. I don't think that this is the best use of our time when we are squabbling. It's one thing to have fun and laugh as members of Congress and try to find humor or some sort of lightheartedness in what we are doing. But when things get as heated as they have. It's unfortunately an embarrassment on our body as a whole. And so I just want to personally apologize to the American people for that. But we are here to hold Attorney General Merrick Garland in contempt of Congress for ignoring subpoenas and believing that he is above the law. We simply want to hear what was said in the interview that was transcribed. Yes, we have the transcriptions, but the White House has recently edited President Biden's mistakes by labeling them, quote, inaudible in transcripts. The committee members must be able to assess for themselves that the transcripts accurately reflects the true content of the interviews. Now, the American people, fortunate or unfortunate, have heard Joe Biden speak for over 3 years now. Really, if you include the campaign, about 4 years. And we have witnessed in real time a massive cognitive decline. President Trump, when he was in office, he underwent testing for his cognitive dissonance, for his ability to function as president of the United States, as the commander in chief. And unfortunately, I haven't seen Joe Biden even read a teleprompter properly and get through the reading without also adding in what's in the brackets when he needs to take a pause. And there are many things that we could go on here, but I want to hear the inflections in Joe Biden's responses when he is answering these questions. Now, on February 27th, 2024, the Oversight Committee issued a subpoena for relevant information regarding the special counsel's investigation, including the transcript and any recordings of the special counsel's interviews with President Biden in October of 2023. Now, to date, the Department of Justice has refused to provide the committee the audio recordings. It's a very simple request. It can be provided at any time, but maybe, just maybe, this administration that has tried to cover up so much and tried to physically lift up Joe Biden and keep him upright is hiding even more. So we just want to hear how that interview actually went. I am in favor of moving forward to hold Attorney General Merrick Garland in contempt of Congress. I think there are many other things that we need to have him in for and move forward on in holding him accountable. I mean, he's gone after so many American citizens, moms and dads who attend school board meetings, those of the Catholic faith. The DOJ has been completely weaponized, and it's very sad for our country. But this hearing will continue. We have many amendments. I'm sure there will be much dialogue. Hopefully, there is some decorum on both sides of the aisle. And if in my remaining 1 minute, I could request, every so often, Mr. Garcia, maybe you could just lift up that picture of our President Trump sleeping. As you say, I think he's praying. But if he is sleeping, he certainly looks pretty while he sleeps. Maybe it's an endearing moment of prayer, though. I know when I fall asleep on airplanes, my mouth kind of drops open, and his mouth is kind of tight-lipped. So maybe it's just a somber moment of.
I mean, he's
thought.
sleeping. It's been reported by multiple press outlets.
I was in the
that
courtroom
actually
today, and
sleeping.
I do. I could see why someone would fall asleep, just like George Conway fell asleep today. In the court hearing, it's kind of slow in there. It's not as exciting as the House Oversight Committee, but I just wanted to say that's a lovely picture you have of President Trump, Mr. Garcia. Thank you. And I yield.
Gentlelady yields back. Does any other member wish to speak on the underlying? Mr. Goldman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In preparing for this markup, I wanted to do a little bit of work to understand why the Oversight Committee is trying to hold the Attorney General of the Department of Justice in contempt. The Oversight Committee does not have jurisdiction over the Department of Justice. The Judiciary Committee does, and I understand the Judiciary Committee held a markup of their own today on the same exact contempt motion. And so I thought, oh, well, let's take a look at the impeachment investigation. It must be coming from that. So I looked at the impeachment resolution that was passed on December 13th, 2023, HRes 918, and it refers to a memorandum dated September 27th, 2023 from the three chairs that was entitled Impeachment Inquiry. It's 30 pages long, this memorandum, and there isn't a single mention of classified documents or special counsel Robert Hur or Joe Biden possessing classified documents. And so, Mr. Chairman, I would ask what on earth we are doing here in the Oversight Committee when we have no jurisdiction to be holding the Attorney General in contempt. And I'll happily yield to you if you would like to respond. Doesn't want to respond.
I'll respond.
Go ahead, Mr.
Yeah, we
Gosar.
actually set the precedent in my first term, our second term, in regards to holding Mr. Holder accountable in contempt in this very office or this very committee. And
Yeah, but that was related, Mr. If I may just reclaim my time, that was related to an investigation that this committee was doing. What the special counsel Hur was investigating has nothing to do with anything that this committee is investigating. I understand that the impeachment investigation that you all ran was such a massive flop and a bust that you would like to try to distract from that complete humiliation, but doing so outside of your jurisdiction is probably not the best way to do it. And in reality, not only was this absurdly postponed so some people could go prostrate themselves in front of their dear leader today in New York, and we are now at 10 o'clock at night, but we have absolutely no reason to be here. We have no jurisdiction over this matter. It was properly in front of the Judiciary Committee. The Judiciary Committee will do what they want to do over there in the Department of Justice, but it is truly a reflection, an unfortunate reflection, of how desperate the chairman is to distract from what was a monumental bust of an impeachment
Would
investigation.
the gentleman yield for a
And
question?
so, not quite yet, Mr. Briggs. I'll get to you.
Thanks.
And so I would urge the chairman to explain to all of us what, other than pure distraction from the impeachment investigation that seems to be over now, as to why we are here at 10 o'clock at night marking up something over which we have no jurisdiction. Mr. Biggs, happy to yield to you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And Mike, I guess my question is on your jurisdiction position, your position that we lack jurisdiction. I'm wondering if you would take, if what you think of Rule 10 of the committee's jurisdiction, and also
Well,
also
I don't have Rule 10 memorized, Mr. Biggs.
we'll take a look at it because it says in. Let me see if I can just give you a
Go
slight.
ahead and read it, just like you can read the transcript.
Yeah. Well, I would prefer actually seeing the audio of the transcript, hearing the audio of the transcript. Anything at any time. That's the language that's used in Rule 10. Take a look. It might be helpful when you're making a lack of jurisdiction argument. The other thing is,
What,
Does
sorry,
our
what is
commi-
anything at any time, Mr. Biggs?
take a look in Rule 10. I think you'll change your position. Let me ask you this other question.
Would the gentleman yield?
Well, I'll reclaim my time and
Yeah.
yield to Mr.
Yeah.
Raskin.
I wanted to thank the gentleman from New York for his trenchant remarks here. Would you think it's fair to say that it's not only way outside of our jurisdiction, but it's also redundant, given that the Judiciary Committee, which has jurisdiction, has already acted?
Well, of course, this is already going to go to the House floor regardless of whatever we do. So it's a shame that this committee feels so desperate to latch on to some victory that we need to hold a completely redundant, unnecessary markup over something that we have no jurisdiction. Mr. Chairman, I
And the
yield back.
gentleman's time's expired. Does anyone else seek recognition? We have some amendments to be offered. Can we start with the amendment process? Is everybody okay with that? I will begin. I recognize myself to first offer an amendment. The clerk will distribute the amendment to all members. Everyone have my amendment. The clerk will please designate the amendment.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to the contempt report as offered by Mr. Comer of Kentucky.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read.
I reserve a point of order.
Order. I recognize myself for 5 minutes to explain the amendment.
Great. And I reserve a point of order against the amendment. Thank you.
As I said in my opening remarks today, the Department of Justice informed the committee that President Biden is asserting executive privilege over the audio recordings of his interviews with Special Counsel Hur. Until today, the White House had not asserted any privilege and, in fact, bragged that President Biden had not asserted executive privilege in the interest of transparency. My amendment simply amends the contempt report to reflect that the White House has now asserted a privilege regarding these recordings. Though I believe this is a miscalculated and invalid assertion of executive privilege, my amendment would make the contempt report reflect today's developments from the Department of Justice and the White House and reflect the record as of today. Do any other members wish to speak on this amendment? If not,
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Chair recognizes Mr. Goldman.
This is the part of the problem why you can't give the Republicans nice things, because it's never enough. And it is true that the President Biden has not asserted executive privilege over the entire subpoena, effectively, that they responded to, but for the audio, which is redundant because you have the information. There's no point in having the audio other than for political partisan purposes. And I understand how my colleagues get irritated because every time you bring up something about President Biden, we bring up something about President Trump. But the reason we do is because in every single circumstance, what President Trump did was so egregious compared to what President Biden may or may not have done. Donald Trump asserted executive privilege over everything, over just about everything while he was president. It was a reflex of his. And here you're complaining that Joe Biden finally asserted executive privilege over material that you cannot possibly enumerate a legitimate legislative purpose about. There is not one. You cannot, nobody can tell me. I know you say that what the intonation is why you need this, but I can assure you every court of law would tell you that the intonation of the voice as opposed to the words on the page is not a legitimate legislative purpose.
Mr. Chairman, would you yield to me, Mr. Chairman?
I think it's
Is it
Mr. Goldman's time.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you had yielded, Mr. Goldman.
no, that's okay. So I do think that the executive privilege assertion is yet another reason why the contempt motion fails, as it has previously, and that there has been contempt proceedings have been called off when administrations, the last administration, has asserted executive privilege. If you would like to challenge the executive privilege, you may do so. You may go to court. But to hold the Attorney General in contempt over something that the president has asserted executive privilege is completely illegal and improper. So in addition to the jurisdictional problem, you also have an executive privilege problem, because you can't hold someone in contempt for something they have no control over, whether it's asserted executive privilege. You're welcome to go to court. You can go to court and challenge the assertion of executive privilege. That has happened before. Don McGahn has a very well-known case now that was litigated because he asserted, the president asserted executive privilege over him. But this is a legitimate use of executive privilege. And if you disagree, go to court. But this contempt hearing and this contempt motion is completely nullified by the assertion of executive privilege.
Would the gentleman yield?
Yes, I yield to Mr. Raskin.
And thank you again for your clarifying analysis of the contempt citations. Some of our colleagues invoked the cases of Dan Scavino and Peter Navarro and Steve Bannon. We're talking about people in those cases who never produced a single document and never spent a minute before the committee. They completely blew off their subpoenas, which is why they were held in contempt by the Congress, and then they were subjected to criminal prosecution for it. Now you compare that to the case of the Attorney General of the United States, who produced precisely the document that was being sought, all 250 pages of it. Then there's a bait and switch, and then it said, oh, well, no, now we want the audio tape. He has a very reasonable invocation, I assume, of executive privilege, although I haven't looked at it. But in any event, not anything that you would base a criminal arrest upon, given that he overwhelmingly complied with the demands of the committee. And I think everybody's got to concede that. And if you want to make the argument splitting hairs that, well, through some intonation or accent in the audio tape that a high crime and misdemeanor might emerge, then please make that argument. If somebody could even offer us a hypothetical of how we could ground this in the jurisdictional authority and the legitimate exercise of power of this committee, explain how the audio tape could reveal some intonation or accent that would produce the holy grail that you've been looking for 18 or 19 months, which is a high crime or misdemeanor. And so far, nobody's uttered a peep about it. Thank you for yielding, Mr. Goldman.
I yield back.
Gentleman's time's expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the chair, Ms. Crockett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, the point of deciding that we need to release this audio is really simple from my analysis. This is an opportunity for your party to take an opportunity to try to mock the current president. I know a lot of people refer to the former president as president, but we have one president at a time, and that is Joe Biden. And seemingly, this type of attitude and position has come straight from the top. This idea of lacking all decorum, decency, has left the building when the stench of Donald Trump showed up. And so we've seen constantly from him how he mocks people. We've seen in this committee how different members want to mock other members. And that's all this is about. But what is so frustrating to me, and what should be frustrating to the American people, and the reason that really all y'all should lose y'all's jobs, but why we are going to take the majority is simple. It's because we showed up ready to work earlier today, like we always do. And now it is currently 10 p.m. and we are still here because we are committed to doing the right thing. And my question is really simple. It's a matter of, if this was such a big deal, if it was a matter of an emergency, if this was so important as it relates to whether or not the president of the United States has done something so wrong, then why is it that we couldn't have our hearing at 11 o'clock this morning instead of members being in a criminal courthouse with a twice impeached, over 88 count indicted sexual abuser, instead of being here to do the work of the American people? If this was serious, this is the reason that people don't believe that we are doing serious
Mr. Chairman,
work
point of order.
here.
I'd ask the,
State your point.
my point of order is this. She just engaged in personalities about a former president, which
You can't engage
just
in personalities
reviewed.
with a
No,
former
You've
president.
just
That is not the
reviewed the rules, and you know that it's true. If you were on the floor, you would be admonished. You know that.
not the rules. That's not the rules.
Right.
That point of order would not be.
That what?
Mr. Chairman, I'll further say, if this happened
Yeah,
on the
right,
floor,
right.
you would be admonished by the
Your
parliamentarians.
point is correct.
No, you made in this circumstance, you made an announcement, I believe, that points of order about insulting presidents or former presidents are not in order in this hearing, because I take it you're going after Joe Biden, and so
I gave it to him. Okay. All right.
I think you carved out an exception to that rule.
Okay. Point of order overruled. Ms. Crockett, finish, please.
I'll yield the remainder of my time.
All right,
to
thank you.
Would my friend yield to me?
Yes, I'll yield the remainder. of my time.
I thank the gentlelady. You know, originally we have a motion an ANS to hold the Attorney General in contempt because he did not produce one item, an audio tape of the transcripts that were provided in full. And we decided apparently that that was what we were going to do because we're not sure about our chances in a court of law, which is really where this needs to be adjudicated. Now we have an amendment to the ANS taking cognizance of the development today in which the White House, not an unusual development and not always justified, invokes executive privilege. Now that is as old as the Republic. In fact, the first president to invoke executive privilege was George Washington, who did not want to provide documents regarding the Jay Treaty because it was controversial and might embarrass the White House. And we have had ups and downs with respect to executive privilege ever since. But the proper venue for adjudicating this is in a court of law. It isn't this committee. And so now this amendment to the amendment is essentially holding an attorney general in contempt because they're invoking executive privilege to protect information they choose not to provide the Congress. And I find that a very narrow basis. And I can understand why you don't want to have this adjudicated in a court of law, because I don't know that any judge would find that we have substantial reason to hold somebody in contempt for noncompliance. I thank the gentlelady for yielding.
You yield back.
I yield the remainder to the ranking member.
And I yield back to you, Ms. Carter.
Then I yield.
Thank you. The question is now on the amendment offered by the chairman. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to.
Recorded vote, please, Mr. Chairman.
Recorded vote has been requested by Ranking Member Raskin. Okay. The clerk will call the roll. Oh, no.
It's a recorded vote.
Okay. A recorded vote is ordered. What? Hold on.
Further proceedings.
Okay. As
Mr.
previously
Chairman.
announced, further proceedings on the question will be postponed.
Mr. Chairman, parliamentary inquiry.
Yes,
and
Mr.
I think an actual one, which is rare. Would it be a proper motion for me to make? This is an important amendment offered by the chairman of the committee. Would it be a proper motion for me to make that we hold the vote on this specific amendment immediately and not roll it to the end? Would that be a proper motion for me to make?
That is. Yeah. That motion is in order. You want to?
I would make that motion.
Okay.
Second.
Motion and second. All those in favor of the motion to proceed? Okay. Do we have to vote on that?
Yeah, we'll go on the vote.
Okay. With a, what?
What's the motion?
Okay. All right. The clerk will call the vote on the amendment.
Motion?
It was a request.
Okay.
All right.
Mr. Jordan. Mr. Jordan votes yes. Mr. Turner. Mr. Gosar. Mr. Gosar votes yes. Ms. Fox. Mr. Grothman. Mr. Cloud. Mr. Cloud votes yes. Mr. Palmer. Mr. Palmer votes aye. Mr. Higgins. Mr. Higgins votes yes. Mr. Sessions. Mr. Sessions votes aye. Mr. Biggs. Mr. Biggs votes aye. Ms. Mace. Ms. Mace votes aye. Mr. LaTurner. Mr. LaTurner votes aye. Mr. Fallon. Mr. Fallon votes aye. Mr. Donalds. Mr. Donalds votes yes. Mr. Perry. Mr. Perry votes aye. Mr. Timmons. Mr. Timmons votes aye. Mr. Burchett. Mr. Burchett votes aye. Ms. Green. Ms. Green votes aye. Ms. McLean. Ms. Boebert. Ms. Boebert votes aye. Mr. Fry. Mr. Fry votes aye. Ms. Luna. Ms. Luna votes aye. Mr. Langworthy. Mr. Langworthy votes aye. Mr. Burleson. Mr. Burleson votes aye. Mr. Waltz. Mr. Raskin.
Nope.
Mr. Raskin votes no. Ms. Norton.
No. No.
Ms. Norton votes no. Mr. Lynch. Mr. Lynch votes no. Mr. Connolly.
Nay.
Mr. Connolly votes nay. Mr. Krishnamurthy. Mr. Khanna. Mr. Mfume.
No.
Mr. Mfume votes no. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez votes no. Ms. Porter. Ms. Porter votes no. Ms. Bush. Ms. Brown. Ms. Brown votes no. Ms. Stansbury. Ms. Stansbury votes no. Mr. Garcia. Mr. Garcia votes no. Mr. Frost. Mr. Frost votes no. Ms. Lee. Ms. Lee votes no. Mr. Kassar. Mr. Kassar votes no. Ms. Crockett.
No.
Ms. Crockett votes no. Mr. Goldman.
No.
Mr. Goldman votes no. Mr. Moskowitz. Mr. Moskowitz votes no. Ms. Tlaib. Ms. Tlaib votes no. Ms. Presley. Ms. Presley votes no. Mr. Chairman.
Yes. How is Dr. Fox been recorded?
Dr. Fox is not yet recorded.
What about
Ms. Fox votes
Mr.
aye.
Groffman? Has he been recorded?
Mr. Grothman is not recorded.
And-
Mr. Grothman votes aye.
How has Mr. Waltz been recorded?
Mr. Waltz is not recorded. Mr. Waltz
And
votes
how has
aye.
Mr. Krishnamurti been recorded?
Mr. Krishnamurthy is not recorded.
I vote no.
Mr. Krishnamurthy votes no.
Does any other member wish to vote? Seeing none, will the clerk please report the tally?
Mr. Chairman, your vote.
I voted yes.
Mr. Chairman votes yes. Mr. Chairman, on this vote, the ayes are 24, the nays are 19.
The ayes have it, and the motion is, the amendment is adopted.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
I have an amendment at the desk.
Chair recognizes Ms. Luna.
Has it been distributed?
Will the clerk please report the amendment?
I'll reserve a point of order, Mr. Chairman.
An
Well,
amend-
But before the clerk wrote, you have a point of order, Mr.
Just reserving it.
Okay, reserve it. Clerk, please report the amendment.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to the contempt report as offered by Ms. Luna of Florida.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read. I reserve a point of order. The gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Luna, is recognized for 5 minutes to explain the amendment.
I wanted to offer this amendment because I, like so many Americans, have frankly lost faith in the justice system. And there was some comments made earlier by my colleague, Mr. Goldman, who I actually very much so enjoyed debating with on this committee. But he said that oversight did not have authority in regards to contempt proceedings. And during my time off for maternity, after I was told that I could not vote, I actually spent that time reading the House Rule Book and Manual. And there's something that hasn't been used since the early 1900s called inherent contempt of Congress. It's actually something that any one individual member reserves as their right and authority in the House of Representatives. And the reason why we're here today is because the Attorney General thought he was above the law and did not comply, not just with one subpoena, but with 2 subpoenas. Those are subpoenas from both Chairman Jordan and Chairman Comer. I want to read this to you because ultimately, if in 10 days the Department of Justice does not do their job and hold the Attorney General responsible, just like they would any other American, I think that it should be our job in the House of Representatives to bring an inherent contempt proceeding against the Attorney General, of which I've already filed that privilege motion over a week ago. And so, although I realize that my Democrat colleagues might have an issue with this, and I'm willing to retract the amendment, I would like to read it real quickly and saying that resolve that if in 10 days after the passage of this report, the Department of Justice had failed to indict Attorney General Garland, the Speaker of the House of Representatives shall issue his warrant commanding the Sergeant at Arms or his duty to take into custody the body of the said Attorney General Garland, wherever found, and bring him to the said Attorney General Garland before the bar of the House of Representatives, then and there to provide documents, materials, and answer such questions pertinent to the matter under inquiry as the House of Representatives may order the Speaker of the House of Representatives to propound and to keep the said Attorney General Garland in custody to await further orders of the House of Representatives. This is something that we reserve as an authority in order to bring back order to a House that has seemed to have forgotten it. And so with that, Chairman, I just wanted to let you all know as my colleagues, because I'm sure we will debate this on the floor, I fully intend in 10 days after this passes out of committee to hold Attorney General Garland in inherent contempt of Congress if the Department of Justice does not do their job. And with that, Chairman, I'm going to withdraw my amendment, and thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question on the
I
yield
thank
the
the
rest of my
lady
time.
for withdrawing, for raising this issue, and please note that she withdrew her amendment. Now, I understand. Okay, we're going to suspend for 1 moment. How many minutes do they have?
You gotta give us a ballpark. Yeah, I mean, you need to tell us what.
Okay. The committee will reconvene. I understand, Mr. Goldman, you have an amendment.
I do, Mr.
Will the clerk please report?
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to the contempt report as offered by Mr. Goldman of New York.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read. I reserve a point of order. The gentleman from New York is recognized for 5 minutes to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment details and enumerates exactly what the subpoena requested and exactly what the Department of Justice has done in response to that subpoena. And I will summarize that the subpoena of February 12th requested all documents and communications, including audio and video recordings related to the special counsel's interview of President Biden, as well as the special counsel's interview of Mark Zwanitzer, who is the ghostwriter of President Biden's book or books. 3, the documents identified as A9 and A10 in Appendix A of Mr. Herr's report. And 4, all communications between or among representatives of the Department of Justice, including the Office of Special Counsel, the Executive Office of the President, and President Biden's personal counsel referring or relating to Mr. Herr's report. Obviously, it goes almost without saying that that last request is completely improper, would be deliberative process and executive privilege, although I don't think they determine executive privilege, but there is no basis for Congress to get internal communications within the Department of Justice about decisions they have made. And if you have any question about that, you should go refer back to your favorite former president and his administration, where they use that repeatedly. In response to the subpoena, the special counsel, or rather the Department of Justice, provided the unredacted report, as you know, the transcripts of the interviews of President Biden and Mr. Zwanitzer, provided the documents identified as A9 and A10. So really the only thing that could even be considered as a legitimate request that the Department of Justice withheld is the audio recording of the 2 interviews, about which there already is a transcript. And so the question that this amendment begs is, if the majority thinks that giving substantially the entire subpoena response, responding with substantially everything that the subpoena asks for warrants contempt of Congress, what does the majority think about somebody who, I don't know, refuses to respond to a subpoena altogether? Maybe Chairman Jordan has a response to that? Mr. Biggs, Mr. Perry? Because I'm pretty sure that they each received duly authorized subpoenas, and I appreciate that the
Will the
gentleman
gentleman yield?
Georgia, in 1 sec, I will. I
You
appreciate
asked
that
me to respond.
the gentle lady, I will, 1 second. The gentle lady from Georgia, with her esteemed legal knowledge, determined that the January 6th committee was not a legitimate committee, when unfortunately a number of actual courts of law determined that it was. So those subpoenas to members of Congress were duly authorized subpoenas. And if Merrick Garland is going to be held in contempt and is going to be threatened with inherent contempt and sent to a non-existent jail in the basement of the Congress, then what is going to happen to those witnesses who just outright defy congressional subpoenas? Because I do think the majority ought to be careful about the precedent that it sets, because Ms. Luna, I am happy to reinstitute right now with you inherent contempt. And I can assure you that when you consult with the rest of your party, nobody will want it, because
Will the
it
gentleman
will
yield?
be much, much worse for you than for the Democrats.
Will the
Sure,
gentleman
I'm
yield?
happy to yield, yes.
I just like to point out that inherent contempt or contempt, as to my understanding, can't be brought forward in a new Congress, even if it's been a past violation. I know because I actually inquired on Cohen today.
Oh,
So
yeah,
just
no,
so
no,
you're
no,
aware.
I'm not suggesting that we bring
Well, I'm
inherent
just,
contempt
just to
for
clarify.
any past subpoenas. I'm talking about the precedent that you are
Are you,
setting.
are you now willing
Like
to
you
yield,
said, Mr. Biggs? Yes, of
Mr.
course.
Chair.
Thank you for yielding to me. First of all, you made a personal reference again to Mr. Jordan, about myself, and about Mr. Perry, which we had agreed that we wouldn't do. But I'm going to respond to you. We asserted that we had not received service. And
Okay.
that's how we
So
responded.
your
So
response
end of
is that you
story.
didn't receive service of the subpoena. I just want to be clear. That's why you didn't comply?
Gentleman's time's expired. Gentleman's time's
I
expired.
thought so. I'll yield.
Do any other members wish to speak on the Goldman amendment? Mr. Chair recognizes Mr. Fry from South Carolina for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I oppose this amendment by Mr. Goldman. Mr. Goldman's amendment is just an attempt to distract from the very obvious and clear fact that the Attorney General has failed to comply with a duly issued subpoena. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the District Court has stated that the level of grave accusations that a president may have committed treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors, the House must be appropriately informed. Mr. Goldman's amendment completely ignores the fact that audio recordings, as he knows as a lawyer, are material to understanding the full context of President Biden's mishandling of classified documents, his credibility as a witness, and his fitness to serve as President of the United States. Quite simply, the Attorney General has not complied with 2 subpoenas. Mr. Goldman's amendment completely distracts from that obvious fact. And I'll remind my colleagues that a subpoena is not a menu. It's not an a la carte menu that you can choose what you comply with or not. You either produce the requested materials or you don't. And when Mr. Goldman was with the Department of Justice, he probably didn't allow criminal defendants to pick and choose what subpoenas they were going to comply with. And so it just simply put, this amendment is just about helping President Biden hide in the basement, but by other means.
Will the gentleman yield?
No, sir.
Gentlemen, time's expired. Or he yielded back. Do any other members speak? Mr. Conley? Or-
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The gentleman from South Carolina just implied, more than implied, that that there's evidence the President of the United States committed high crimes and misdemeanors. Her report finds otherwise. He, in fact, found no grounds for proceeding. That may be an unpleasant fact, but it is a fact. In addition, there is no committee in this Congress that has found the President of the United States guilty of high crimes or misdemeanors, nor is the President currently the subject of the charge that he is guilty of high crimes and misdemeanors.
Will the gentleman yield?
So if we're going to take care in invoking presidents' names and characterizing them, their circumstances, or their legal standing, let's at least stick to the facts. I yield back.
No, Mr.
Will the gentleman yield?
I'm sorry, I yield first to the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Conley. And I want to further clarify this issue for our colleague, because I did have some familiarity with these contempt motions. Now, when the January 6th committee, whose legality and constitutionality was repeatedly upheld by the DC Circuit and no court ever rejected it, issued subpoenas and requests to testify, hundreds of people cooperated. More than 900 people did what the vast majority of Americans do. You get a subpoena, you go and you testify. If you get a subpoena for documents, you turn over the documents. There was a tiny handful of people who blew off the subpoenas. Some of them claimed to be invoking executive privilege even when Donald Trump didn't invoke executive privilege. Some of them were not even working for the government when they purported to invoke executive privilege. And they were referred for contempt motions and voted that way. And then prosecutions were brought only against those people who categorically didn't participate. I'll give you an example of someone who kind of did the hokey pokey. He was sort of in and sort of out. And that was Paul Manafort. And he participated some and then some not. There were some other witnesses who were kind of, Mark Meadows, that's who I'm thinking of. Mark Meadows is the one who turned over a whole bunch of stuff. And then we understand Donald Trump wasn't pleased and he stopped cooperating, but he was never held for contempt because he had at least partially complied. Okay. So now you're talking about the Attorney General of the United States who's invoked executive privilege for one very small part of the overall subpoena, but has materially, substantially, and overwhelmingly complied in this case by turning over the entire document that was subpoenaed, which was the president's testimony. And now people are talking about invoking the inherent power of contempt of Congress, which hasn't been used in more than a century, to go and arrest him because you didn't get the audio tape.
Will the gentleman
that you
yield,
wanted?
please?
For a quick question, sure.
Actually, it's my time,
Oh, I'm sorry.
and I yield to the ranking member.
Thank you. I would just to complete
Will the
my
gentleman yield
I'll
for a
just complete my
question?
point, and I'll yield back to the very distinguished gentleman from Virginia. So I think that our colleagues should really think about what they're talking about here. You understand that when he was president, Donald Trump invoked executive privilege and cut off all cooperation with legislative committees in more than 100 cases. You're saying he could have been arrested 100 times and thrown into jail. And don't bury your faces in your phones. I mean, I just want you to follow the principle of your argument that Congress can throw anyone in jail if
Will the
there's...
gentleman yield?
Well, I'll yield back to my distinguished
I
friend.
would yield to the gentlelady, yes.
I think the whole point of this, and this is not tit for tat, this is a very serious thing in that Congress used to be respected, and we are no longer respected because people do not respect our authority. And so the inherent contempt clause, I'm not hoping that he's thrown in jail. What I'm saying is that he's violated a law, something that we have as a privilege. And as a result of that, any other American would be in trouble or in jail because of it. And so
Reclaiming my time, I want the gentlelady to know that on the principle of inherent contempt, I actually agree. I believe that the courts are too slow in enforcing congressional subpoenas, and therefore the work of the legislative body is impeded. But that begs the question of whether there are serious grounds in which to bring a contempt citation.
will
And
the
if we're
gentleman
going to
yield?
use that power, we'd better use it very carefully and thoughtfully. And I do not believe this proceeding against Merrick Garland meets that criteria. But thank you for the point.
Gentlemen, time's expired. Chair now recognizes Mr. Jordan for 5 minutes.
I think the chair, independent and impartial. That's what they told us. Attorney General of the United States says we will administer justice in an impartial fashion. The White House said we'll let the Justice Department operate in an independent fashion. The key question for this committee, the key question for the Judiciary Committee earlier today was the decision not to prosecute President Biden consistent with that commitment that President Biden and Attorney General Garland gave the country? It's a key question for the Congress when we're doing our oversight. Trump was charged, Biden wasn't. We know that's the case. Was their commitment to impartiality and independence, was that what was actually going on? Particularly when you look at what Robert Hur found. Page 1 of his report. Our investigation uncovered evidence that President Biden willfully retained, willfully disclosed classified materials after his vice presidency when he was a private citizen. So he met the elements of the crime. He kept information he wasn't allowed to keep. He shared information he wasn't allowed to share. Now, why would he do that? Well, guess what? Robert Hur told us that too. Page 231 of the report. He says it right here. Mr. Biden had strong motivations to ignore the proper procedures for safeguarding classified material. He had decided months before to write a book. So he had motive. The motive was the book he wrote, for which he got paid, by the way, $8 million in advance. So he had an $8 million motive. He met the elements of the crime, but he's not being charged. And one of the things we have to evaluate as a Congress, the legislative branch, is, are they administering justice in a fair and equal fashion? It's a fair question. And the best way to determine that is to get all the evidence and the best evidence. The best evidence, the purest evidence, would be the audio tape. The transcript's great. I would argue he's already waived privilege when he gave us the transcript. But we want the audio tape because that's the best evidence. That's the best evidence we can have as the body who's supposed to do oversight. It's part of our constitutional duty. In order to do that, we should get the best. That is the simple question. We can get all the other fights we get into in Congress. God bless us. That's how it goes. But to me, that's the fundamental question. The elements of the crime were met, both of them. He knowingly, and by the way, he knew the rules. He'd only been in government 50 years, chaired the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, vice president of the United States, getting a daily briefing, intelligence briefing all the time. He knew the rules, didn't follow them, shared them with the ghostwriter, did it for $8 million, but wasn't charged. Why? Why? Because Mr. Hur said he's a forgetful, elderly gentleman. That's what he told us. So we want to evaluate it all. And the best way to do that is to get all the evidence. That's all this is about. Plain and simple. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes Ms. Stansberry from New Mexico.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to make some points for the record on this amendment and on this proceeding this evening. And I want to start off by first saying to my colleagues across the aisle, welcome back to Washington, D.C. I know it's late, and I know a bunch of you have been traveling. You are on the road today, and I know you must be tired. You all were visiting Donald Trump's trial today to defend his porn star hush money case. And in fact, we have some cute pictures of you here today, and they are some cute pictures, so congratulations, and also some from the last few days. And it looks like you guys had a good time in the courtroom today. But you know what? I don't know, the speaker looks a little bit stressed here. I mean, it's a lot, right, to ask someone who's facing a criminal trial and running for president to ask his political allies to travel over 200 miles on a voting day here in Congress to pop up to New York and snap some cute pictures to defend him because the judge has ordered him to stop threatening the jurors in his own trial. I mean, some might actually view this as direct interference in a criminal court case. It's not exactly law and order, as our friends like to talk about all the time. But I want to just take a moment to let you all know what you missed today while you were up in New York. You missed some votes. Yeah, you weren't here. You didn't show up for votes. You didn't vote on some of the bills that you claimed were your priorities, some of your public safety and border bills. I mean, I can see you had some important business to take care of here today. And as the ranking member noted, the chairman did manage to find time today after they canceled the hearing this morning to have his political fundraising team send out this fundraising email. And I do genuinely hope you made some good money off of it because, you know, we're not actually supposed to use the resources that the taxpayers fund in this committee to fundraise off of. But it does really make you wonder why we're sitting here at 10:30 at night after this is the activities that the GOP were engaged in earlier today when we were supposed to be having this hearing. These fundraising emails went out. Why are we here? Why are we using taxpayer official resources in this committee right now? I mean, could it be political? I mean, it would make sense why you guys rescheduled and skipped votes and went up to New York, and here we are. And if there's any indication that this impeachment scheme is in its flop era, I mean, I don't know what is. This committee has spent 17 months reviewing 3.8 million pages of documents. 3.8 million pages of documents, 80 hours of recorded testimony, and not turned up a single shred of evidence in this impeachment scheme. And yet you still had time to go to Donald Trump's trial where he's about to be convicted. And so, you know, I think it's very clear what all of this is about. The GOP is using this committee and its resources to make countless misleading and false statements to try to spin a political narrative, to fundraise off of it in a blatantly partisan effort to support Donald Trump's reelection. And I mean, if you need any evidence, it's right here behind me. So I thought it was important to really set the record straight on this. This is not a taxpayer-funded campaign effort. And if you needed any evidence that that is what the majority is involved in here, I think it's very clear that that is what this hearing is all about, or we wouldn't be sitting here at 10:30 at night after your little field trip. And with that, I yield back.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Biggs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this hearing started off tonight with a crazy satire, and with the condescending presentation we just received, it just continues and perpetuates. So I'm glad we actually had an agreement that we were going to tone it down. This is why you can't. It's tough to make deals with my colleagues across the aisle. They condescend, they call out individuals, and they don't go to the issues. That's why it's tough, folks. That's why it's tough, and you wonder why But here, let's take a look at a few things here. It wasn't that special counsel Hurd did not find that criminal activity had taken place. As Mr. Jordan just pointed out on page 2, we found out that the President Biden, when he was after he left the vice presidency, he unlawfully retained and disclosed classified information, but he wasn't prosecuted. That's what you guys conflate that. He wasn't charged, and you say, "Oh, see, he didn't do anything wrong." No, that's not true. He did something wrong, but Mr. Hurd made a prosecutorial decision. He said, "Well, you know, this is a feeble old man with a poor memory, and you know what? Going to be tough to actually convict." Now, the Attorney General has received a subpoena, and this amendment by the gentleman from New York basically says, including audio and video recordings. And we're told, gee, if he substantially complied, whoop, that's great. That's all you have to do. But we actually had a great example earlier this evening why you just might want to have the oral transcript. You just might want to have that oral audio recording. What was it? You remember? Nobody could successfully identify and isolate and remember what Ms. Greene said exactly. And so we went to there, and the comment was, well, the best that we could determine. But you know what might have helped? An audio recording. And that's why an audio recording becomes valuable in this particular case as well. Now, yes, the best evidence, the original evidence. Now, the President Biden has now asserted executive privilege, which is no longer available to him because he waived executive privilege when he actually provided the written transcript. He also went way past the deadline. He should have, when the subpoena was due, that's when he should have made that assertion. He chose not to, and that's part of his problem. And then I think of the Mitchell case, and if you remember the U.S. v. Mitchell case, President Nixon was trying to get by with turning over what? Some part of the written transcript. This is the written transcript. This is what you should have. And the U.S. Supreme Court said, no, turn over the audio recordings. That's what happened in the U.S. v. Mitchell case. Next thing here, when we get to the jurisdiction, oh my goodness gracious, we don't have jurisdiction. Actually, we do. Rule 10.4 C2. Take a look at that. In addition to its duties under subparagraph 1, the Committee on Oversight and Accountability may at any time conduct investigations of any matter without regard to clause 1, 2, 3 of this clause, conferring jurisdiction over the matter to another standing committee. That means we can have jurisdiction over darn near anything. And we've claimed jurisdiction. That means we can go forward with it. What else you got? Let's see here. Oh, goodness gracious, it was late. It's late. Why are we here? It's late. You know why it's late? You know why we're here? Because the time for this hearing was set for 8 p.m. Properly noticed. That is all right. And you know what? I've actually been in committees that have started late after votes when the Democrats had control. And we went through to midnight, 1, 2 in the morning when Democrats were sitting in the chair. That's so, I don't feel bad about that. So what you have here is the Democrats conflating executive privilege as well as the contempt. But the issue that they fail to understand is that the full compliance of the subpoena required disclosure of the audio recordings. It's right here in this proposed amendment. So what would happen if you had a deposition and you did both a video recording and a written transcript? Do you think the court's going to say, hey, look, you can have one but not the other? No, that's probably not going to happen. So time's expired.
Time's expired. I think Ms. Crockett seeks recognition.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do want to make sure that we point out some obvious differences in what the majority is talking about. Number one, we're talking about an interview that was voluntarily done by the sitting president of the United States versus someone who is obstructed at every angle. In fact, is continually obstructing to the extent that we are waiting on the Supreme Court to give us a ruling on whether or not it's okay for him to commit his crimes while sitting in the Oval Office and be excused for them. So we've got trials all over the place that are on hold because of the continual obstruction. The difference in the documents case between the former president and the current president could not be any clearer. We absolutely didn't have mounds of documents sitting in someone's bathroom versus some that had been stored in a garage. But also it's this level of voluntariness. And so for those that aren't lawyers in the room, typically we look to something that's called mens rea. And mens rea is always talking about a level of intent, and there are various levels of intent. And so while someone may be negligent, that may not necessarily rise to the level of criminality. But when someone is being intentional by making sure that they get rid of the video footage, they lie to their lawyers, they lie to those officials that are coming and inquiring of them, that is why you then end up facing criminal charges. But I also just want to make it clear, because it seems like when we talk about conflating, that those in this legislative body really want to be more so on the judiciary side of things. They really sound like they want to enforce various things. They want to enforce the law. They want to somehow decide over what has already been decided, that the president of the United States should be charged with a crime. And I guess somehow they're going to figure out a way to charge the president. But I do want to remind this committee and the chairman that since since day one of the 118th Congress, which is now over 17 months, the majority has wasted the committee's resources, time, and quite frankly, the sanity of members and staff on a sham impeachment investigation that has failed to produce one legitimate piece of evidence of wrongdoing by President Biden. And the quote unquote evidence our chair and majority used as its basis to try to impeach the president was the FD 1023 form that is since found to have information from an individual who was fed lies by Russian assets. Now, I know the chairman and the majority on this committee know how to read. And so, in fact, we heard from a member that she's read through all the rules. So I'm not really sure why reading this transcript is so difficult. But members and staff on both sides of the aisle have combed through over 3.8 million pages of documents and 80 hours of testimony for nearly 20 witnesses, scouring all of this material to try to find any evidence of wrongdoing by President Biden. But lo and behold, there never was any, because there clearly is none. Because if there was, our chairman would have moved forward with a vote to impeach in this committee. The American people want the truth, and the truth is that every member on this committee has access to the 250 pages of transcript of what the president said during his voluntary sit down for questioning with the special counsel. But maybe my colleagues on the other side of the aisle simply want the audiobook version of the transcript because they have nothing better to do than to listen to it on repeat on their train ride to and from Trump's criminal trial and Veep's stakes tryouts. By the way, we love the matching red ties.
Will the gentlelady yield?
I will yield.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to make a point in answer to the distinguished chairman of the Judiciary Committee. The special counsel in this case on page 97 says, and I quote, "The published book is not known to contain classified information." Special counsel was very clear that President Biden did not retain or use classified documents in order to sell his book. And you might not like the conclusions of the special counsel, who was a Republican appointed by President Trump, but those were his conclusions. And either you stand by the rule of law or you don't stand by the rule of law. And all of us have the transcript to read, and all of it bears that out. There was no intention by President Biden to exploit any classified documents. I yield back.
Gentlelady's time's expired. Chair recognizes Mr. LaTurner from Kansas.
Mr. Chairman, I move the previous question.
Motion to move to previous question.
I object.
I second the motion.
Motion and second. It's non-debatable. And all those in favor?
All right, let's have a recorded vote if we could,
The
Mr.
motion is not debatable. Shall the main question be now put? Those in favor of moving the previous question signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The previous question is ordered.
I'd like a recorded vote if we could, Mr. Chairman.
A recorded vote is ordered. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Jordan. Mr. Turner. Mr. Gosar. Mr. Gosar votes yes. Ms. Fox. Mr. Grothman. Mr. Grothman votes yes. Mr. Cloud. Mr. Cloud votes yes. Mr. Palmer. Mr. Palmer votes aye. Mr. Higgins. Mr. Sessions. Mr. Sessions votes aye. Mr. Biggs. Mr. Biggs votes aye. Ms. Mace. Ms. Mace votes aye. Mr. LaTurner. Mr. LaTurner votes aye. Mr. Fallon. Mr. Fallon votes aye. Mr. Donalds. Mr. Donalds votes yes. Mr. Perry. Mr. Perry votes aye. Mr. Timmons. Mr. Timmons votes aye. Mr. Burchett. Mr. Burchett votes aye. Ms. Green. Ms. Green votes aye. Ms. McLean. Ms. Boebert. Ms. Boebert votes aye. Mr. Fry. Mr. Fry votes aye. Ms. Luna. Ms. Luna votes aye. Mr. Langworthy. Mr. Langworthy votes aye. Mr. Burleson. Mr. Burleson votes aye. Mr. Waltz. Mr. Raskin.
Mr. Chairman, to be clear, this is a motion on the previous question to cut off all debate and all amendments. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. And including the pending amendment or no?
Pending amendment.
So we would vote on the pending amendment or we would
Yes,
not?
Yes, we'll vote on the pending amendment.
Okay. My vote is no. I've never seen this done in this committee in 8 years by either the Democrats or the Republicans. I vote no on the motion, the previous question. No.
Mr. Raskin votes no. Ms. Norton.
No.
Ms. Norton votes no. Mr. Lynch.
No.
Mr. Lynch votes no. Mr. Connolly.
Nay.
Mr. Connolly votes nay. Mr. Krishnamurthy. Mr. Khanna. Mr. Mfume.
No.
Mr. Mfume votes no. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez.
No.
Ms. Ocasio-Cortez votes no. Ms. Porter.
No.
Ms. Porter votes no. Ms. Bush. Ms. Brown. Ms. Brown votes no. Ms. Stansbury. Ms. Stansbury votes no. Mr. Garcia. Mr. Garcia votes no. Mr. Frost. Mr. Frost votes no. Ms. Lee. Miss Lee votes no. Mr. Kassar. Mr. Kassar votes no. Miss Crockett.
No.
Miss Crockett votes no. Mr. Goldman. Mr. Goldman votes no. Mr. Moskowitz. Mr. Moskowitz votes no. Miss Talib. Miss Talib votes no. Miss Presley. Miss Presley votes no. Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman votes yes.
How is Mr. Waltz recorded?
Mr. Waltz is not recorded. Mr. Waltz votes yes.
How is Dr. Fox recorded?
Ms. Fox is not recorded.
And
Ms.
how
Fox
is
votes yes.
Mr. Krishnamurti recorded?
Mr. Krishnamurti is not recorded.
No.
Mr. Krishnamurti votes no.
How is Mr. Higgins recorded?
Mr. Higgins is not recorded. Mr. Higgins votes yes.
Have all members been recorded?
Mr. Chairman, would you just explain why you invoked that? Because that hasn't happened in 70 years in this committee.
Will the clerk please report?
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, the ayes are 23, the nays are 19.
The move to previous question passes. The question is now on the pending amendment from Mr. Goldman. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed signify by saying no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the
Recorded vote.
amendment is not agreed to.
Request recorded vote.
A request for recorded vote has been requested. Will the clerk please call the roll? This is on the Goldman amendment.
Mr. Jordan. Mr. Turner. Mr. Gosar. Mr. Gosar votes no. Miss Fox. Miss Fox votes no. Mr. Grothman. Mr. Grothman votes no. Mr. Cloud. Mr. Cloud votes no. Mr. Palmer. Mr. Palmer votes nay. Mr. Higgins. Mr. Higgins votes no. Mr. Sessions. Mr. Sessions votes no. Mr. Biggs. Mr. Biggs votes no. Miss Mace. Miss Mace votes no. Mr. LaTurner.
That's good for you.
Mr. LaTurner votes no. Mr. Fallon. Mr. Fallon votes no. Mr. Donalds. Mr. Donalds votes no. Mr. Perry. Mr. Perry votes nay. Mr. Timmons.
Not enough.
Mr. Timmons votes no. Mr. Burchett.
I could have predicted that.
Whose name were you on?
Mr. Burchett.
Mr. Burchett.
Mr. Burchett votes no. Miss Green.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Miss
Oh,
Green votes no. Miss McLean.
What did they say?
Miss Bobert.
Are you an APAC guy or what?
Miss Bobert
J Street?
votes no. Mr. Fry. Mr. Fry votes no. Miss Luna. Miss Luna votes no. Mr. Langworthy.
Right. Saying the right thing.
Mr. Langworthy votes no. Mr. Burleson. Mr. Burleson votes no. Mr. Waltz. Mr. Waltz votes no. Mr. Raskin.
Aye.
Mr. Raskin votes aye. Miss Norton.
Yes.
Miss Norton votes yes. Mr. Lynch. Mr. Lynch votes aye. Mr. Connolly.
Aye.
Mr. Connolly votes aye. Mr. Krishnamurthy.
Aye.
Mr. Krishnamurthy votes aye. Mr. Khanna. Mr. Mfume.
Aye.
Mr. Mfume votes aye. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez.
Aye.
Ms. Ocasio-Cortez votes aye. Ms. Porter.
Aye.
Ms. Porter votes aye. Ms. Bush. Ms. Brown. Ms. Brown votes yes. Ms. Stansbury. Ms. Stansbury votes yes. Mr. Garcia. Mr. Garcia votes yes. Mr. Frost. Mr. Frost votes yes. Ms. Lee. Ms. Lee votes yes. Mr. Kassar. Mr. Kassar votes yes. Ms. Crockett. Ms. Crockett votes yes. Mr. Goldman. Mr. Goldman votes yea. Mr. Moskowitz. Mr. Moskowitz votes yes. Ms. Tlaib. Ms. Tlaib votes yes. Ms. Presley. Ms. Presley votes yes. Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman votes no.
Has Mr. Perry been recorded?
Mr. Perry is recorded as no.
Have any other members that not been recorded? Seeing none, will the clerk report the tally?
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, the ayes are 19, the nays are 23.
The Goldman amendment fails. The question is now on the amendment in the nature of a substitute to the report. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment in the nature of a substitute to the report is agreed to.
Recorded vote.
On the ANS? Yeah. Okay.
But we're not allowed to bring in any other amendments.
Well, we've had deals that have, you all.
It hasn't happened
you
in
have
70
not-
years.
you-
Mr.
you
Chairman.
have-
70
you
years.
have- we have tried to negotiate with you and you've not done it. A recorded vote is ordered on the ANS. Will the clerk please report?
Mr. Jordan.
It's,
Mr. Turner.
I don't know, but they say we can't.
Mr. Gosar. Mr. Gosar votes yes. Ms. Fox. Ms. Fox votes yes. Mr. Grothman. Mr. Grothman votes yes. Mr. Cloud. Mr. Cloud votes yes. Mr. Palmer. Mr. Palmer votes aye. Mr. Higgins. Mr. Higgins votes yes. Mr. Sessions. Mr. Sessions votes aye. Mr. Biggs. Mr. Biggs votes yes. Ms. Mace. Ms. Mace votes yes. Mr. LaTurner. Mr. LaTurner votes yes. Mr. Fallon. Mr. Fallon votes yes. Mr. Donalds. Mr. Donalds votes yes. Mr. Perry. Mr. Perry votes yes. Mr. Timmons. Mr. Timmons votes yes. Mr. Burchett. Mr. Burchett votes aye. Ms. Green. Ms. Green votes aye. Ms. McLean. Ms. Boebert. Ms. Boebert votes aye. Mr. Fry. Mr. Fry votes aye. Ms. Luna. Ms. Luna votes aye. Mr. Langworthy. Mr. Langworthy votes aye. Mr. Burleson. Mr. Burleson votes aye. Mr. Waltz. Mr. Waltz votes aye. Mr. Raskin.
No.
Mr. Raskin votes no. Miss Norton.
No.
Miss Norton votes no. Mr. Lynch. Mr. Lynch votes no. Mr. Connolly.
Nay.
Mr. Connolly votes nay. Mr. Krishnamurthy. Mr. Krishnamurthy votes nay. Mr. Khanna. Mr. Mfume.
No.
Mr. Mfume votes no. Miss Ocasio-Cortez.
No.
Miss Ocasio-Cortez votes no. Miss Porter.
No.
Miss Porter votes no. Miss Bush. Miss Brown. Miss Brown votes no. Miss Stansbury. Miss Stansbury votes no. Mr. Garcia. Mr. Garcia votes no. Mr. Frost. Mr. Frost votes no. Miss Lee. Miss Lee votes no. Mr. Kassar. Mr. Kassar votes no. Miss Crockett. Miss Crockett votes no. Mr. Goldman. Mr. Goldman votes no. Mr. Moskowitz. Mr. Moskowitz votes no. Miss Tlaib. Miss Tlaib votes no. Miss Presley. Miss Presley votes no. Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman votes yes.
Have any members failed to vote? Seeing none, will the clerk please report the tally?
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, the ayes are 23, the nays are 19.
The ayes have it. The motion is passed. The question is now on favorably reporting the report. Members will record their vote. We do the. Okay, the clerk will call the roll. So last vote.
Mr. Jordan. Mr. Jordan votes yes. Mr. Turner. Mr. Gosar. Mr. Gosar votes yes. Ms. Fox. Ms. Fox votes yes. Mr. Grothman. Mr. Grothman votes yes. Mr. Cloud. Mr. Cloud votes yes. Mr. Palmer. Mr. Palmer votes aye. Mr. Higgins. Mr. Higgins votes yes. Mr. Sessions. Mr. Sessions votes yes. Mr. Biggs. Miss Mace. I'm sorry, Mr. Biggs. Mr. Biggs. Mr. Biggs votes yes. Miss Mace. Miss Mace votes yes. Mr. LaTurner. Mr. LaTurner votes yes. Mr. Fallon. Mr. Fallon votes aye. Mr. Donalds. Mr. Donalds votes yes. Mr. Perry. Mr. Perry votes yes. Mr. Timmons. Mr. Timmons votes yes. Mr. Burchett. Mr. Burchett votes yes. Miss Green. Miss Green votes yes. Miss McLean. Miss Boebert. Miss Boebert votes yes. Mr. Fry. Mr. Fry. Mr. Fry votes yes. Miss Luna. Miss Luna. Miss Luna votes yes. Mr. Langworthy. Mr. Langworthy votes yes. Mr. Burleson. Mr. Burleson votes yes. Mr. Waltz. Mr. Waltz votes yes. Mr. Raskin.
No.
Mr. Raskin votes no. Miss Norton.
No.
Miss Norton votes no. Mr. Lynch.
No.
Mr. Lynch votes no. Mr. Connolly.
Nay.
Mr. Connolly votes nay. Mr. Krishnamurthy. Mr. Krishnamurthy votes no. Mr. Khanna. Mr. Mfume.
No.
Mr. Mfume votes no. Miss Ocasio-Cortez.
No.
Miss Ocasio-Cortez votes no. Miss Porter.
No.
Miss Porter votes no. Miss Bush. Ms. Bush votes no. Ms. Brown?
No.
Ms. Brown votes no. Ms. Stansbury? Ms. Stansbury votes no. Mr. Garcia? Mr. Garcia votes no. Mr. Frost? Mr. Frost votes no. Ms. Lee? Ms. Lee votes no. Mr. Kassar? Mr. Kassar votes no. Ms. Crockett? Ms. Crockett votes no. Mr. Goldman? Mr. Goldman votes no. Mr. Moskowitz? Mr. Moskowitz votes no. Ms. Tlaib? Ms. Tlaib votes no. Ms. Presley? Ms. Presley votes no. Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman votes
Have all
yes.
members been recorded? Will the clerk please report the tally?
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, the ayes are 24, the nays are 20.
The motion passes. Pursuant to this vote, the committee hereby adopts the report recommending that the House of Representatives find Attorney General Merrick Garland in contempt of Congress for refusal to comply with a subpoena duly issued by this committee. We will move the report to the full House. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
Mr. Chairman.
Pursuant to House Rule
Mr. Chairman.
11, Clause 2, committee members shall have the right to file with the clerk of the committee supplemental, additional, minority, and dissenting views within 2 days. Without objection, so ordered. Additionally, the staff is authorized to make necessary technical and conforming changes to the report reported today, subject to the approval of the minority. Without objection, so ordered. If there's no further business before the committee, without objection, the committee stands adjourned.